Where familiar territories meet, we go Mahou a Mahou, pitting magical girl shows head to head to have a heart-to-heart about their genre content and our heartfelt opinions.
My name is Grant.
And I'm Brantley.
Today we will be covering Magical Girl Raising Project, comparing it to Madoka Magica. We'll be talking about the similar themes, the characters, what one does good, what one does bad, and going into the thematic elements that both of them share.
Spoilers ahead for these shows and potentially others. Check the description for a complete list to make sure you're safe to listen.
Brantley, do you want to give a quick rundown of what we did in the past 2 weeks?
Well, we watched both shows. So, honestly, it doesn't sound like that big of a deal to say, hey, we watched, 12 episodes, 24 episodes of anime over the past 2 weeks. Hey, we're here to podcast, not to do math. Anyways, we watched all of Magical Girl Raising Project, and then found that we were so hedged into the Madoka comparisons. We thought, okay, it's gonna happen at this point. The comparisons are just right there. We have to check ourselves. Let's rewatch Madoka. And we did. So, in Mahou Mahou, I think one of the things that we want to do is we're not trying to trash one show and praise another. Mm-hmm. However, in this situation, it might sound like that because we have a fairly differing opinion between Magical Girl Raising Project and Madoka. However, what we're saying is that if we ever do this again, it might not be one's bad, one's good. They might just have similar themes, mm-hmm. But this one is bad and one is good. Mm-hmm. And we'll try to play to the positives and negatives of each. But
absolutely,
be prepared. Magical Girl Raising Project is probably going to end up the more sore of these two shows by the end.
All right. So, for those who listened to our first episode and didn't really want to watch Magical Girl Raising Project, we were pretty curious as to whether it would turn into a very deep outlook into the idea of having magical girls compete to see who's the best magical girl, or it turned into a trashy kill fest. Unfortunately, it turned into a trashy kill fest.
Which, granted, we really should have known, considering the opening shot is a body pile. Which, by the way, we had kind of hedged bets on when's the body pile going to get mentioned, when's going to come up. But yeah, we put our hopes in it, and those hopes were a little dashed. Maybe that's why it's a little personal. Continue.
I will say that after doing some research, and according to a comment we received on that podcast by Misk Inchling, the light novel goes a lot deeper into the things that we wanted to, and a lot of people think that a second season to the show would make it shine, mm-hmm. because of what the light novel does. So we are only talking about the anime and what we saw, and I'm sure that giving enough time, it might have been able to kind of pull us back in. Mm-hmm. So we're going to start with what the entire show was. So we do this is a spoiler warning. We will talk about Magical Girl Raising Project and the character deaths. We will talk about all of Madoka Magica, and there might even be some spoilers for Magia Record. Probably not as much, because I want to do an episode on that one.
Is it Magia Record or is it Magia Record?
It doesn't. I don't know.
Were you going to say it doesn't matter? Because I kind of
agree. It doesn't.
Man, you heard the intros on our other episodes. We're two white dudes watching anime Magical Girl shows. You got to understand. You got to set your bar a little lower.
So, in essence, the entire Magical Girl Raising Project had a twist ending where, of course, the magical girls were being used to further some goal from some other far-off, distant, interdimensional land, and they were all being pitted against each other to find out who was the strongest. And everybody died, essentially. So, Brantley, I want you to do me a favor.
Sure.
Let's play a game. Mm-hmm. What is one word you would describe Magical Girl Raising Project as?
Aimless.
I would say messy. So I think that we have a similar idea. Why do you think it's aimless? What do you think? What do you mean by aimless?
Well, I think I've made it clear on past episodes. I really like taking a show and seeing what can be metaphorically drawn from it. God, this is gonna sound pretentious. But no, I like trying to take a show's fictional material and essentially drawing out from it something that relates to the real world. How can we sort of anchor this in things that are currently happening? I feel that it shows that this is a work that is, able to be interpreted, and it's a way to tease the work. You're kind of having a one-way interaction with it. So I really enjoy that. Whenever I try to do that with Magical Girl Raising Project, and to better understand essentially what would, codify as themes, the more I pulled at it and the more I tugged at it and tried to sort of bring it over into the real world, the more I just came up with contradictions and dead ends that didn't meet. Almost like split ends, Right. And so I have a difficult time, maybe it's just me, I have a difficult time finding what the message of the show is, besides that people have problems and life sucks. Everything kind of doesn't reach a fitting conclusion that doesn't also get, like, T-boned by some other in-world event that sort of thematically disrupts it.
I think I'd agree with you on a lot of parts. The reason I say messy is because it likes to introduce a character. It likes to give you a little teaser of what they're actually like, and then it just kills them off. Every single time a character is about to die or dies, we get a flashback explaining who they were, but by that time, you're not invested enough to care. And because you have all these intersecting characters with different backstories that you really don't know too much about, it just seems like it's a mess that's being thrown on the wall so that you can maybe tug at the heartstrings a little when there is a death.
Yeah. I feel like there's a symbolic almost reference to that messiness. In the second episode, right before Nimrine is about to kick the bucket, they have, like, the music cut out to sort of, like, essentially pull the rug out from underneath you right before you have your emotional realization, oh no, they've killed a character. But in doing so, it's a little mistimed, and so it feels awkward or almost funny. I feel like that in its own right is emblematic of what you've described. It's messy, partially intentionally, partially not, and the places where it wasn't intentional feels pretty apparent.
Right. So we're gonna move on. We're gonna talk a little bit more about Magical Gore Raising Project before we get to Madoka. Do you think that Magical Girl Raising Project's themes and its presentation could make for a good Magical Girl show? Ignoring all the flaws that it has as a show in general, do you think that there is something in Magical Girl Raising Project that gives it something new to the genre?
Yeah, I think that it's the first that I know that got to the gamification aspect as, like, a major plot point. And that feels modern, especially considering this was, 2012? Like, that was...
Yeah.
We're accustomed to this kind of stuff now. But I would say that's closer to the advent of that, and so I would say that's a good catch. The interaction with apps, and I know you and I have talked about before how we were kind of hoping they would take this in the, literal contract direction of, like, interacting with the end user license agreement. When you're starting up a game or something.
And if they didn't, and as if they didn't read it and they weren't aware of what was going to happen. I think that's what episode 1 does really, really well. I mean, when we watched episode 1, if you want to listen a little bit more in depth on our opinions, we do have that on our channel. But when we listened to episode 1, there was something that made us watch the rest of the series, which is nuts, because we went in with the idea that it was going to be a trashy kill fest, and episode 1 kind of pulled at that. It kind of gave the idea of what if magical girls weren't exactly there to fight monsters, but were there to just do good deeds, to fight, the darkness of humanity, to help humans in general. And having this gamification where they collected points and there was a ranking system, it made us interested. And, for a little bit, I mean, La Pucelle, I cared about her at the beginning. I cared about Snow White at the beginning. And because it only focused on those two characters, I thought it really could have gone somewhere.
Yeah, it had a
and I think
focus.
It did. Right. I think it did that well. Now, where do you think it went wrong?
I'm gonna say episode 2. No, kidding. No, I think it didn't like its own ideas well enough to stick with them. As you mentioned, we quickly eject out of the perspective of Snow White, past episode 2, and now she's almost like a secondary or tertiary character in some episodes. Not to say that you can't have, dual protagonists or anything, but that secondary protagonist doesn't ever stick for too long. For a while it's Apicel, for a while it's Ripple, for a while it's Hardcore Alice, and so we're constantly juggling all of these, and Snow White still isn't being given that. The gamification is dropped almost immediately. Like, I think a third into the show is when they just stop talking about candies, and you don't ever see a counter again after that, which feels kind of like a waste. They did all the time to set it up and establish it, and understanding that it has a purpose here. But I suppose what they wanted to push more as a narrative focus was that doesn't matter once you're killing people, which is sad to me.
Right. And I find it interesting because what I thought was that even if I thought people were still going to be dropped, even if someone died. Mm-hmm. So I was under the impression that someone at the bottom would start killing other people to take their candies, mm-hmm. while people at the top could, still farm them from good deeds. And I thought that would have been a little bit more interesting take, where you'd have this haves and have-nots of this app, mm-hmm. Working together to prevent themselves from dying. But once again, they just started killing mm-hmm. each other.
Make things better by working together. It's a simple message, and it comes from the heart. Believe in yourself, and that's the place to start. And I said, hey, these magical girls are gay. There are several lesbian relationships, and they get along with each other.
They do, and God damn it.
I'm surprised I carried that so far.
That was incredible.
Should we save that? Do you I don't want to cut too far ahead, so let's take it away.
I do want to kind of go back to some of the relationships that you mentioned in your incredible Arthur song. But before we go into there, I do want to ask what I had talked a little about how I would change it. I would focus a little bit more on the gamification, keep candies a focus, even with some murder. What are some things that you would change for the thematic values? To keep the theme of what it has, where you have a system in place that is inherently going to cause someone pain.
Mm-hmm. My initial thought was to remove the death penalty that they have, because then that allows the economic reality of doing good to sort of settle in. Mm-hmm. If you're in this system where you earn points for helping people, but then they take that away and they say, sorry, you didn't hit quota, now you don't get any candies and you're ejected from the system, do you continue doing good deeds? Or do you find yourself in a new position in society, right?
I like that a lot. I think the thing is that would eliminate a lot of the, let's kill people. Mm-hmm. However, I feel like you could still have characters, if you keep the same rules, like if someone is dropped, then no one gets dropped this mm-hmm. week. You could keep the same rules where you do have people trying to kill other magical girls, and maybe that you would have some deaths, and they would be a little bit more impactful because they're deaths and not being ejected mm-hmm. to prevent themselves from losing their powers. I actually really, really like that.
Yeah, alternatively, maybe your device still is linked to your account, and so it's less about, I guess that's almost a soul gem thing, Madoka style. Maybe you kill someone, you take their phone, and now you have their magical girl identity because it's just an app account. Now you're once again earning credit for yourself socially by engaging in this. And that would almost do more with the whole popularity aspect that they string in suddenly and awkwardly.
Oh, right. There is that. There is a weird part where the twin characters try and make a YouTube video or like PV. Just like an online video to get popular, and it goes nowhere. Mm-hmm. So let's keep on this idea of themes, but let's shift our focus to the other show we're going to be talking mm-hmm. about, which was Puella Madoka Magica. Now, I'm going to preface all of this by saying that this is my absolute favorite show of all time in anime, so I'm going to try and be as unbiased as possible. I do recognize the faults that PMM has, but I do really, really love it.
Yeah, and that goes for all of this,
Right.
Part of the value of bias is that when you acknowledge it, it gives you a better understanding of position. If you just pretend like bias is not there, then you can't really relate yourself to someone else. So consider this, my bias towards Madoka is not nearly as personal as Grant's. I came to that party late. I like it a lot, but it's not the kind of thing that like is bonded to me or that I feel bonded to. So I mean, still gonna give it like that 9 or 10 score out of 10 if I had to put numbers on it. But I'll say this, like, I think Grant kind of gets to be an authority because it is attached to him.
I fucking love Madoka. That is all this podcast is about, is because I love Madoka.
This was the road here.
So what do you think makes Madoka a good magical girl show? In comparison, we both know that they're dark magical girl shows, but what makes Madoka feel like it does it better in our opinions?
I almost feel like I might need more time to think about this outside of this podcast. I'll say this. I think that Madoka's attention to detail, but not so much a focus on technicality, helps it to be a better magical girl show. There's less hinged on like a layering of rules which could, potentially slip out from each other and cause a fracture. And instead, they keep things pretty simple for a good amount of the show. By the end of it, you have, quite a number of these interlocking rules. You made a contract, you are a soul inhabiting a body in like a puppetry sense. You have to destroy despair, or else be, absorbed by it. And that's a good chunk of the rules that are established. Whereas Raising Project likes to use like the patch style of lifestyle games as a reason to keep adding new rules and twists, and I don't think they were constructed well in ties with each other. It feels like patching, but also, I have, on a case-by-case basis, disagreements with what those patches were. So I guess I should say, I think where it becomes a good magical girl show is through simplicity. It's not a simple show, but that's how it gets closest to that.
I think I totally agree with you on there. I do think that one of the things that Madoka Magica does better is that it sticks a little bit more to the magical girl roots. To me, it kind of feels like Magical Girl Raising Project just wanted magical girl in its name, and just made superheroes.
Yeah.
Which is fine, and that's totally fine, but I think it removes a lot of it keeps the familiars, it keeps some pretty limited transformation scenes, and it keeps some powers and rules and contracts, but it doesn't, it tries to kind of play with that idea that magical girls represent hope and dreams and love by putting it all on Snow White. And I think you can do that, but I think Madoka does it good by kind of distancing it or kind of putting it on different people. They once again tried to do it in Magical Girl Raising Project by giving Top Speed that sense of justice that Sayaka has, or giving Snow White and Hardcore Alice that sense of wanting it to be a better place. But it's so short-lived because the show needs to move at a breakneck speed to make sure that you care about some characters. I think that one of the things that I kind of thought about this is Madoka Magica plays on classic magical girl tropes to make it work. It is directly inspired by Sailor Moon and Cardcaptor Sakura and all the older shows Well, I think Magical Raising Project is inspired by Madoka.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of playing on old tropes and older kind of magical girl theory, it focuses on what Madoka did and tries to do it, but with more killing and more blood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you imagine it sort of branches off of a tree, then Madoka is closer to the roots.
Yep.
Since Madoka is already derivative, if you derive off of Madoka, then you're kind of farther and farther out. And then in order to support that branch to make sure it doesn't sort of sag, then you need to start bringing in other influences that aren't so magical. You know, bring in a little Battle Royale, bring in a little Danganronpa, or, you know, whatever.
Right. And we mentioned Danganronpa a lot more with Magical Girl Raising Project than I've mentioned Danganronpa in my entire life.
Disclaimer here, we don't know the exact influences of Raising Project. I'm making some assumptions there, you know, and I'm not even that attached to those assumptions. You know, I wouldn't die on that hill, but just as a reference point.
Right. What are some things you think that Madoka Magica doesn't get right?
Well, I'd almost say... I don't know that I can say it doesn't get right, but I can try to speak towards things that are a little less effective. I guess that one of them is pacing. Not in the sense that I ever felt like I was out of the loop of the show, but I definitely remember some parts better than others. There are some spacious pieces, and so I think, you know, if you aren't totally glued to the series, then it can kind of slip away from you. Especially if it's focusing on characters that you're not that interested in. You know, if you're someone who finds Sayaka and Kyosuke irritating, then yeah, those like late middle episodes are probably going to lose you a bit. You know, Madoka does get a little lost like Snow White does, just less so.
Right.
You know, I think it's safe to say too, there are some problematic elements in the intro, like opening movie, that I'm not a big fan of, but like they're the prettiest obvious ones. It's like, I don't like seeing Madoka in a set of lingerie. I don't like seeing that amount of detail in like on Madoka during the transformation. You know, considering she is an underage character. These are things that I can, you know, draw back to Magical Girl DNA, like you said. You know, the first nude transformations were like Cutie Honey, Marvelous Melmo, like way back.
Right.
And so like those are in a way referential. I just don't think I would miss them or assign any value to them being there. Then again, the opening largely exists outside of the show in a way. It's not like it is, you know, a necessary canon depiction of things that happen in the show. It includes canon visualizations, but you could know everything you needed to know about the show without it. And so it's a give or take kind of thing. How about you? What do you think?
I want to touch on what you said. I think that the purpose of the opening is to kind of lie to the viewer about what the show's about, kind of give it the sense that, oh, it is a generic magical show. Oh, it is a happy magical girl show. But I can't disagree with the problematic elements. It's weird because I've seen, you know, new transformations that are glowy and completely not sexualized. I think Sailor Moon does it pretty well, where you don't really see anything. It's just
contours.
You know, yeah. But I think that part is a little uncomfortable. I actually watched the first episode of Madoka with my cousin before we watched it, and I kind of was like, ew, I forgot how weird that shit is.
Yeah.
And I kind of like profess that I'm like, this is just to lie to you. Like, I think one of the things that gets me about Madoka is there's a lot of assumptions that it expects you to make. Kyoko is my favorite character in terms of design, but watching it again, And I do like what they do with her in Rebellion. I think my love for Kyoko comes from the show and Rebellion's interpretation of her. But watching it again, she is insufferable.
Mm-hmm.
Like, when she plays as the, hey, I'm the badass, evil, magical girl, and I'm here to kick your ass, it's cool. It's like, wow, there can be dicks in this show, and they can be mean. And I find her heel turn when she finds out that, the soul gem is actually their soul, and how she approaches Sayaka and be like, hey, we can be friends now. It feels a little rushed. And one of the things I realized, and I talked to you about this when we were watching it, is that Madoka has a ton of info dumps. Just a lot of info dumps. And it's made better by Shaft's incredible weird animation that they put with them. So when Kyoko explains her backstory, you get to see these little puppets that she's puppeting to explain what's going on. And it's super surreal, and it's super creepy. And you notice a lot of little symbolisms that she has in her outfit that you see in this puppet show. But it goes on for like 3 to 4 minutes. It's a lot. And I realized that the show wants to do more, but with how much episodes it just has to rely on info dumps. That would be in a lot of contexts. If I were watching them in any other anime, I'd be very, very upset with it.
I suppose so.
Madoka,
I think really quickly that does attest to the fact that the show did have you well hooked. An info dump, narrated by Kyoko is not much different than a flashback of Kyoko's life, except the info dump happened to be more visually interesting the way that they drew it out. So they took advantage of that.
I agree. I think it's done well. It is definitely the most satisfying info dump I've seen. It's still an info dump, and I find it hard not to criticize info dumps.
Yeah,
and I've said the word so many times, so much it's lost.
I think you're totally on point when you say it feels a little rushed. It feels like Kyoko gets spikes of dynamism in her character where she's sort of making changes, whereas other characters have these smoother slopes. Even Sayaka's motorcycle ramp off into despair, it has a pretty long ramp. Kyoko, unfortunately, being the last one introduced, has to kind of play second banana to everyone, and so therefore she's kind of pitching in between people's words, and so it's understandable, but I agree it's unfortunate that it didn't quite get the execution we would hope for.
And that's why I like what they do with her in Rebellion, by making her the connection to Homer and Rebellion to know that something's up. And I appreciate that. So one of the things that we talked a lot about is the obvious parallels that Snow White has to Madoka. One of the things that I think that Madoka does really well is having a false main character. Not that I know a lot of people say, oh, Homer is the real main character of Madoka Magica, and I would agree with that to an extent, but I think that having Madoka not become a magical girl until episode 12 is such a good way to introduce this character who's seeing all of this, who's always there in the back pocket, and you're just waiting for her to do something, and when she finally does something, it's big, it's powerful. Snow White kind of feels that way. She gets her powers initially, and she just blows out the competition with her candies, and she just becomes the best in Raising Project. But that's it. She exists as a plot device to make the other characters fear her or fear dying because she cannot not lose under normal circumstances. And I think that when you see these characters who are just kind of observers in this war, observers in this fight, because Snow White doesn't kill anybody. Snow White doesn't fight anybody. She gets protected, or she, tries to stop something, but she's not at all a main character in terms of what she does. I'd put that more on Ripple or even Hardcore Alice for a little bit. Like you said, she becomes a secondary and tertiary character. While I think that Madoka stays the primary character without doing those things, without being pushed to the sidelines.
Yeah. And of course, Madoka is dealing with a smaller number of cards in their hands, but that's by design, and so right. was 16 characters. Yeah, I feel like Raising Product doesn't have a main character at all. They're all kind of playing secondary. I can appreciate that Snow White is introduced as the essentially like the representation of ideology doesn't work in practice, right? Right. That she was trying to use the system in a certain way, and the social aspects of that system fought back. But you're waiting for them to have the counter story to say like, well, Snow White's method didn't work because this is how you actually get the job done. But they don't actually propose a solution. It just burns down. Right. That in its own right is a message, but it's not a very interesting one because it's not associated with a character. It's associated with the system being flawed from the start, and no one has any agency as a result. No one really, up until the end, stops what's happening. No one obstructs the process. It is an invincible and omnipotent system that drives itself all the way to the end. And you have to question if you would have replaced, say, 8 of these characters with totally different character identities, would anything have fundamentally changed?
Yeah, and I'd say the answer is no. There's a lot of characters. I think if I were to name the 8 characters that you need to keep, it'd be Ruler, Swim, Top Speed, Ripple, Snow White, Hardcore, Alice, and Tama, the dog girl. I don't think, and you know what, Nemu, Nemuru, yeah. Because of her catalyst that she sends into it. Everybody else could disappear. And I want to use this as a transition to move and talk a little bit more about the different characters in both the shows. Magical Girl Raising Project has a fucking huge cast. Now, it's a little bit more digestible because they start dying, so eventually it gets a little bit more focused, but most of the characters are boiled down to a gimmick or a one-dimensional character arc. So with that said, who's your favorite character, Brantley?
It's not even hard. It's La Pucelle.
Yeah. Why do you like La Pucelle?
She got development. Sato and La Pucelle, I think, very like early out there. Like it's a character that is introduced right away. There's multiple layers going on where you have essentially the before times. Hey, we were school friends, and then some time passes, and we've met again. And that has a little bit of dramatic weight to it. La Pucelle is definitely in the camp of like I love magical girls, which plays to this media's strength. It is here in this genre because it wants to be sold as magical girl content. No matter where it lands on the light to dark spectrum. And so La Pucelle is really doing a good job of pushing the show forward. What happens when a magical girl, has to resort to violence, but is still willing to keep their morals. I feel like La Pucelle is the best at juggling that, versus the other characters' execution. What about you? Give it to me.
While I agree with that, I think my favorite character might be Top Speed.
Yeah.
Just because I kind of liked her, when shit hit the fan, Top Speed ran. And she tried to play the game fair. And I think that's... And they didn't develop it. Like, there's very little development for Top Speed in this case. They don't really talk too much about why she doesn't like to fight, besides the fact that, she was a hooligan and then wasn't. I like that she seems to actually care about Ripple as a friend, and it seems very genuine. I think her death was over the top for over the top's sake. Her being pregnant was an interesting twist, but also didn't really do anything besides try. It seemed more like a shock value than actual sadness. I think it becoming a twist made it worse than if they just told you outright.
Yeah.
I think that Top Speed, also her voice actress seemed to be having the most fun with it. She had a lot of goofy lines that didn't seem tone deaf. There's a lot of tone deafness in this show. But I think that Top Speed, her jokes and her goofiness seemed to be a front to kind of protect her and Ripple from this horrible, horrible thing that was happening. Sure. And I liked that. Her death was once again just kind of lame. I hate that she just got stabbed in the back and that was it. Now here's something that we talked a lot about while we watched the show, and that's the character designs of the magical girls. What are some designs you thought were good, and what is something that you absolutely hated?
Well, I'm gonna flip this. What I hated were the sexualized character designs.
Agreed.
It mostly because I'm not gonna say mostly. It's mostly because they're sexualized and these are underage characters. But it certainly doesn't help that a lot of these outfits don't make logical sense in world. So it's shown that when you're playing the app, the outfit that you've set for yourself as you customize your character becomes your outfit once you are contracted as a magical girl. For that reason, Ripple's stupid sexy ninja outfit doesn't make any sense for her to comment on and say, why do I have this outfit? I hate this outfit. Because you had to have voluntarily set that up, Ripple.
Right.
And that's not a dash against Ripple, that's a dash against, the author, or maybe it was the adapter, who maybe it's the artist originally who drew that character up, and it's too late, we missed that point, whatever, now it's stuck on the light novels, and now we're throwing it into the anime too. I don't know. But the point is that at some part of this chain, this got messed up. And so there's a pretty severe logical failure going on here. I think that Swim's whole, character premise is kind of a mess, but the outfit is an emblem of that. Once again, I'm going to point to Marvelous Melmo for being like an early case of magical girl sexualization, and in the same sense of Swim here, where it is the mind of a child in the body of a teenager to an adult. Even back in Marvelous Melmo, that was, and this is like a Tezuka production, so like go, at your own risk, go look it up sometime, because it was not good. But the premise of that was Melmo's mom dies after getting hit by a car. Her one wish up in heaven is for Melmo to be able to essentially grow into a strong adult who could raise the family, her two younger brothers. And so in order to do that, she gets these capsules gifted to her. One type will make her grow 10 years older, one type will make her grow 10 years younger. But whenever that happens, and she grows up, her mind doesn't, and she immediately becomes a sex object. And it's not like, oh, you're reading into it. Like, literally, characters are like dog tonguing and eyes popping at what is, a child in an adult body. It's real bad. And we haven't learned our lesson, all these years later, and we're still stuck on that trope. Whether it's in the form of Born Sexy Yesterday, or it's something like this, where Swim's transformation makes her look older and, with secondary sex characteristics that are incredibly apparent. That's not good.
It's not. I also think that Swim's design is a mess. Absolutely. 100% a mess. But the fact that her character development is nothing. It is a actual 7-year-old girl who wants to be a princess because someone told her to be a princess in a dream, and because of that, she starts killing everybody. And it's super, like, I'm trying to think of the word. It's disorienting because you have already 2 characters in that show, Calamity Mary and Cranberry, who are just straight up murderers because one is an abusive alcoholic and the other one just wants someone to fight. So you basically have 3 antagonists in the entire show, and Swims makes the least amount of sense because they never give a reason for why she just turned to murder. They never give a reason, and she's deadpan the entire time. She shows one emotion, and it's when she kills Tom.
And that, unfortunately, that's a trope. That's a deadpan lolly.
Right.
You know, which, you know, in a lot of cases is played for laughs. It's like, oh, it's a kid being super serious, which normally kids are not. They're, you know, happy-go-lucky, and they're making noise, and they're energetic. You know, and sometimes you just do have a kid who's just very low energy. Here it's essentially transformed into a stigmatization of psychosis. They have characters literally saying like, "Oh, she has a broken mind." Like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, what? Like, you know, it's very poorly, you know, founded. It's harmful as a depiction, and why swimming? Why like?
It's super weird because her power makes sense, you know, like, well, like, not makes sense in the traditional sense, but she can go through things like water. Fine. But to me, when I was 7, I wanted to have like giant armor and cool shit. And we've already established that she likes princesses. So why does her character look like a professional swimmer? It's super weird, and it's a super weird design choice, and it doesn't fit her character. And I think that's something that the show gets wrong a lot. I think that, you know, a lot of times, sure, it makes sense, but her character and Ripple's character do not. And I think, and it's unfortunately because they wanted to sexualize characters. They wanted to have sexy outfits. And what's even weirder is all the adult characters in that show have normal, regular-looking outfits as magical girls.
And let me slip this in here really quickly. For those who are going to say, oh, it's to throw you off. It's to make you realize that she's not 7 years old because not everyone goes to the wiki, or some people were watching this as it was released. That's still not okay. You have to have the tact to not do that as a creator, for goodness sakes.
And you can make her appear older without her being sexualized. She could be wearing like a, you know, if she wanted to be a princess, she could be wearing very, very regal
just
garb.
The fact that
and
she's
her
tall,
acting like
too.
that.
Like she is as taller than. Look at the twins. The twins are, you know, they transform smaller. So like, this show has a big problem with trying to, and maybe it's a point. You know, maybe it's, oh, when you're a magical girl, no one knows who you are. But the fact that they all have baby faces and their heights are at incredibly varying sizes, you have no idea of who's an adult or not. Also not helped by the fact that they all have, like, squeaky anime girl voices.
Right. Do you think that any of the characters are utilized to a level that is good or enjoyable or deep or thematically interesting?
I think that there were a few moments with La Pucelle, with Ruler, with Nemerin, that I could sort of connect with, or that I at least didn't feel alienated by. You know, if it was like just the sickness of some of La Pucelle's fighting, it's like, oh yeah. You know, I feel like, you know, that is a special part of La Pucelle compared to the other magical girls. That is, you know, a part of her and her raising. You know, I think that Ruler is a decent starter antagonist.
I like her background. I like her backstory. Yeah. I like the salary woman who can't climb the ladders because of sexism, so she establishes herself as a a ruler in the series. Yeah, she's evil. She's very clearly evil.
Mm-hmm.
But it makes sense.
Yeah, it has some foundation. I think that Nemrine was an empathetic character for as short of a time that she lasted.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say, yeah, there are glimpses of that. Same with Snow White. Also, she was believable to an extent.
I like Nemrine's character design. I like the idea of like a sleepy, dreamlike girl who helps people in their dreams. I thought that was cute.
Yeah, they would have sat on her idea and just said, hey, what is the social worth of improving someone's mental health through dreams? Like, that's cool. They could have made a show about that, but they chose not to.
Right. Now, shifting back to Madoka Magica, what are some of the thematic character elements you like of the show versus what you don't like? Like, what characters do you think are utilized well? How do you think that they kind of delve into their characters to create these themes that they wanted to portray?
You know what? I'm gonna toss this one back to you. I want you to start.
Okay. Hold on, I'm gonna bring out my recitation paper, the one I'm getting my PhD with.
Yeah.
All right. No, I think Madoka Magica benefits from only having 5 magical girl characters. Mm-hmm. I think when you tackle a show with more than like 8 characters, it becomes hard. Mm-hmm. You have to decide who gets the limelight, who works better in this way, what they want to show these characters and when. Mm-hmm. And when you're only given 12 episodes, you gotta start killing them off or you're not gonna get it. And Madoka kills off characters pretty quickly. Mm-hmm. I mean, you don't get introduced to Kyoko until Mommy dies. Mm-hmm. So you don't get introduced to Sayaka as a magical girl until Mommy dies as well. So with Madoka, I think you have this thematic depiction of essentially the ideal magical girl. Mm-hmm. Her wish the entire time is, I just want to help people. Mm-hmm. This isn't mentioned specifically in the series, but her first wish was but in the first timeline of Madoka Magica, was to save a cat that wasn't even hers. And that's the cat in the opening. Look it up. It's cool as shit. But she was selfless. She was very filled with hope. And I think that they wanted to use Madoka as kind of the conduit to express that magical girl love that the series creators mm-hmm. had. They wanted that. And I think they do it a lot better than Snow White, because I think Snow White also wants that. And I think Snow White does do it well at some times. I think one of the most emotional scenes in Magical Girl Raising Project was Hardcore Alice and Snow White having a falling out, and then Hardcore Alice dying immediately after. Mm-hmm. I didn't care too much about Hardcore Alice because she was introduced for 3 episodes and died, but I liked the idea that Hardcore Alice looked at Snow White and said, that's what a magical girl is. That's what I want to be. I want to save mm-hmm. people. And that's Madoka.
Yeah.
And I think...
Go ahead, and then I'll... Yeah.
Yeah, and I think balancing all the other characters around that about Madoka makes it so that their themes pop a little mm-hmm. more.
I think that what you just said, that they are concentric circles in terms of, character connections. I think that's what it has over Raising Project. Mommy is introduced and killed in 3 episodes, just like Hardcore Alice is, but Mommy feels at least a touch more developed in comparison, and I feel like it's because she has utility. When you have, a cast of 16 characters, it feels incredibly loose in a relative sense, because you can be jumping around to, more than half the cast in a single episode, especially when they have those big teams going on. And so when that decentralization happens, you kind of forget what each character is sort of trying to promote. Mm-hmm. In Madoka, it feels incredibly minimalistic. As soon as you're kind of waiting for, like, oh, this is dragging a little bit, or, oh, this doesn't feel right, or, I want more drama, it feels like somebody gets thrown into the mix. So, you start with Madoka, Sayaka, Hitomi, and then suddenly we have Homura, who acts as a foil. And so now Hitomi kind of gets shuffled out a little bit. And so, now we have Homura in the picture. But Homura is almost too much of a foil. We need someone in between. Here comes Mami to be on the opposite end of that spectrum. And so now we have a tug of war. We have Madoka and Sayaka in the middle, and Mami is pulling one direction, and Homura is pulling another. Mami gets taken out of the picture because her utility has been served. She said what she needed to say. She's had some combat, and now she's gone. Well, now Homura suddenly has that whole end of the tug of war. So now we introduce Kyoko. And Kyoko is now pulling from a different direction. So now that tug of war is, essentially swinging on a different axis. And all the while, Sayaka boots up to Mami's role. And so now she pulls over to that end of the rope where Mami was. And so it feels like whenever you're feeling lost on something, it's like, okay, but where does the drama happen? They tend to hit that right on the money. I don't get that feeling with Raising Project. It feels like Raising Project does lip service with its characters. Like, oh yeah, we probably should show Ruler and her group around now, It feels like a random trial as opposed to when is this efficiently going to take place? And I think Swim's a proof of that. Down comes the tin foil hat upon my head. I feel like Swim is just the locus of all of the ideas or motivations they couldn't fit anywhere else. They need someone to take out Ruler, but they don't want to, have, say, Calamity Mary or Cranberry come out swinging like that, because then that would motivate other people to change, so it has to be someone from inside. Okay, well, it's not Tama, and it's not the twins, so, okay, we have a character who that's getting dumped into. Okay, well, we also need a character who is willing to somewhat sympathize with the other girls. Okay, and we need someone who has longevity with their powers. Okay, we need someone who has something that's very difficult to stop. Okay, and so Swim kind of gets built up as this epicenter of utility that makes no sense to her actual character motivations. Because she's meant to do too many things, She's meant to establish Ruler and also take down Ruler, and by that metric, you can't really design her character aesthetic or her personality in a way that makes sense. And so it just doesn't. And then because of that decentralization throughout the cast, you just get a crab bucket. They're just crawling over each other for a little bit of attention and they fall back in. And most of them don't have something unique to say outside of a few, edge cases.
Right. And I think, we see the first time we see Swim do basically anything is she steals the candy from Snow White and then she distributes them evenly throughout the cast to kill Ruler. Now it's interesting because at that moment you think, oh, Swim wants to find another way, a different way to maybe save everybody or find something to save people. But they don't go with that. Instead, they're like, all right, time to murder some people. Let's do it. I think you had some characters that, when you talk about edge cases, I think that Winter Prison and Sister Nana could have been better. I like their relationship from the little we've seen about it. I like that they were a canon lesbian couple, which you don't see super often. Normally you get undertones. But they were canon, and they loved each other. I just think that they once again, they told us right before Winter Prison died. And then instead of seeing Sister Nana grieve through it or process those emotions, we see her once more after Winter Prison dies, and she kills herself. And you totally lose any sense of emotional connection to their relationship. Yeah. And I think that's inherently where Raising Project fails. And I think Madoka shines. Because with Madoka once again, when you have the central character who represents everything an ideal magical girl should be, you're able to kind of play with it with the other characters. So you have Mami, who is the ideal magical girl to Madoka. Madoka looks at Mami and she's like, this is it. This is what I want to be. But then you break down that wall and you find out that it's just a face. It's a confidence boost, you know. And she's been alone for so long. She doesn't have any parents. She hasn't had a second for a long time. She's been by herself. And so you see that this is what she's longing for. She wants someone that can see the morality in her choices and be her friend. And then they take it away. But because you've built up Mami as this hero character who is the morally correct one in the situation between her and Homura, and then you break down that wall enough to see that she's actually scared, you're like, oh shit. Because I think when we talked about this, I know we said that Mami was introduced in 3 episodes and died in 3 episodes, like Hardcore Alice, but I think her being the one to introduce them to the magical girl world makes it a little bit easier to do that.
She had a purpose in the story.
Yep. And it's great. And then you have Homura, who represents kind of what Madoka Magica is to the genre of magical anime. She's the outlier, the weird one, the one that you're like, this is not normal. She's evil or mean, or, you know, she has ulterior motives. And then Kyoko comes in, and you realize that Mami was the outlier, that she was the weird one. And you see this hyper-competitive survival of the fittest magical girl that fits in this world that you don't really know too much about. And then you kind of start to see Homura as this, okay, well, maybe her ulterior motives aren't evil, because she's trying to keep Madoka from entering this bloodthirsty world.
I want to counter one of my own points as like, you know, the Madoka characters having distinct utilities, and then going on to say that some of these characters in Raising Project are kind of, you know, batting for multiple things at a time. Homura does do that too, but the flexibility of her is, you know, intentional. She's out to set up balance and to keep things maintained, and so that means she's kind of adjusting her position. Or perhaps when you're changing the angle of how you're looking at it, the shadow gets cast a different way. You know, I don't get that impression with Raising Project characters. It doesn't feel to me that they're working on reason. More often than not, it feels like their motivations are plot-driven as opposed to character-driven, and I don't think it helps that they split them up so early. You have a few pockets that we understand. It's like, okay, everybody listens to Ruler. Lapicel's going to follow Snow White. And so you don't need that much time to develop them once they get that development time in. But then those groups only clash if they're going to kill each other. The exception is Winter Prison and Sister Nana, and even then, most of the time, they're just getting left out on the fringes. You know, their whole utility is to be the balance bringers, like Homura is, you know, to fight where it's needed, and to protect where it's needed. But most of the time, no one bothers with them, and they're just left there grieving. I feel like it sort of defies character utility in that sense.
I think, going back to some of the character utility that you talked about, we have 2 other characters like Swim Swim who want to kill people for almost no reason. And they are described as being mad or crazy, which once again is a negative look at psychosis, but you also don't see this progression of them falling into this despair or this feeling of nowhere to go. You don't see why Cranberry wants to fight stronger people. You don't see her wanting to be more powerful for some end goal. She just wants to kill, which is such a lame character motivation. And Calamity Mary has an even lamer one, because we don't know. You know, she doesn't ever express, I want to kill people, I want power. She just does it. And I think that it's unfortunately something that's very common in anime. You have a lot of characters like that, and I think that it's not good. And to kind of, you know, backpedal back to Sayaka on this, you know, when Sayaka becomes so full of despair, you see that happen. You see her realize that her body is a tool to be used to fight for what she believes in, which is justice. You know, she believes in saving people. That is never a question. But you see her take it to the extreme because she feels that her life is now meaningless. She doesn't think that she could be loved. She doesn't think that she could be part of a relationship. She doesn't see a future where her body is a tool, except for killing witches. And I think in those 2 episodes that we see Sayaka become her witch, I think that is it's such a good, like you said, it's a slow ramp, but it is a ramp. But it's believable. You know, you see the reasons, you see everything, you see her try and justify it. And I think that in that moment when it's all black and white and she's fighting that witch, and you see the first instance of blood in the entire show. Besides Kyosuke's hand, that dumb bitch. You see him. You see this incredibly emotional moment, and it's amazing. It's so good. And I wish Racing Project had something like that. I wish we got to see more why these characters feel like this is their goal. Feel like this is their only way to do this.
But let me play devil's advocate. We see that Calamity Mary was an abusive housewife, and then she became a magical girl. We see that Cranberry had, for one reason or another, been contracted as a magical girl in the first round, and then survives up until the end of that slaughter, basically.
Which she set up. That is another thing. She did set up the battle royale.
So she was the master from the beginning?
Yeah, because remember, she gets the choice. Do you want to go be a magical girl in the magic world, or do you want to be the new master?
Yeah.
And she picks to be the new master and creates the battle royale system to pick the next successor.
Right. So, with that in mind, why is it that you don't feel like they have proper motivations behind their actions?
You know, I think they could. I think if we saw more of Cranberry's backstory, in which she, you know, fails to protect these other magical girls who get killed by the Shadow Demon that you see in the episode 1, or you see Calamity Mary have a lot longer of a fallout. We don't know why Calamity Mary is an alcoholic, and we don't know why she's abusive. We don't know why, and that's not to say that there's ever a justification for that. But when you're writing a character,
you're creating fiction for a purpose. So, you know,
right. And I think that they could have done it well. I think they could have made them sympathetic villains, where you want them to get their comeuppance, but you're also like, damn, that sucks. And we don't see it, and it comes down to the point where it's just not interesting to have characters that just where you see their end state but not their beginning state, especially when it's so unmotivated.
You know, that's a good point. Now I think about it, I can't think of many Magical Girl Raising Project characters that actually have like an arc. It feels like they finished their arc and then now they're toiling into their death. So like Lapucelle's already a badass, and then she takes those justifications for her actions to her grave. Same with Swim for Ruler. I think Snow White's maybe the only person, Top Speed and Ripple too, but Top Speed less so. People who actually change. But even for Ripple's case, again, her starting point in fiction was, you know, horrible abuse and an insecure attachment with her family. And so, you know, what she evolves into is just more sympathetic towards Snow White. You know, it's it doesn't feel like a change in outlook or anything. It's just that. And everyone else just kind of remains who they are up until the end. It's almost like we missed their character development. There's a prequel out there somewhere in which we get to see more of that in depth, but that gets culled out because we just want to get to the action.
And I think the biggest offender for that is a character we still haven't talked about, which goes to show how many damn characters are in the show. And that's Magicaloid 44. We get literally a 2-minute introduction that she is a homeless teenage runaway who is a freelancer to get money. and that's it. But you don't see why she ran away. You don't see what her life is like before that. And what's weird is she commits murder, like, for money.
Mm-hmm.
And she's like, oh, I didn't feel anything except it was kind of gross because there was blood.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, that's a weird jump from giving people technological items to murder for hire.
Yeah.
It's quick. It's quick and dirty and messy.
Messy.
Now, one more question before we wrap up. And I think this is... Well, there's actually two more questions, but the last question, in my opinion, is the wrap-up. I want to compare Fav to QB. Because there's a lot of similarities. And I think there is an interesting conversation behind this. What makes QB intimidating and mysterious and makes you feel like he is such a bastard compared to Fav?
I think this is another case where I want you to take the lead on this. Because I have some ideas, but they're so encapsulated in, like, the Danganronpa influence that I don't want to just entertain that.
But I do want to entertain it just
for sure. But I don't want to start there, if that makes any sense.
Okay.
So I if you can, I want you to lead this.
Okay. So I think the big one is, they're both tricksters. They're both trying to trick people into doing something so that they can benefit from it. But QB never lies, as far as I know. He never tells a lie. He never changes the rules. He never makes something up to get something to someone to do something. He'll ignore information. There's a time where they ask if Homer is safe, and he says, "Go check for yourself."
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's not a lie. That's trying to manipulate someone into doing something. But the rules never change. There's never now you gotta kill 80 of your friends. Mm-hmm. The rules are always the same. And the magical girls turn on each other in Madoka Magica by nature, by design. That is why they designed the witch program. There can only be witches if magical girls fall in despair, and if there's not enough witches, more magical girls will fall into despair. And I think that's great. I think it is a perfect it's like that end license user agreement. Mm-hmm. They don't know that's going to happen, but it is like that way by design. Where Fab just changes the rules, or in this case, Cranberry changes the rules. But the rules are simple, we got to kill people. That's what you got to do. Sorry. Mm-hmm. And they do that twice. They go from 8 to 4, and it doesn't feel smart. It doesn't feel mm-hmm. clever. And I think that's why QB is better. I think that, what's great is they show QB being a cute little familiar almost from the beginning. You see him bathing and he's smiling. He gets fed and he's happy. He walks cute. But there's also pictures of him just staring at the girls and just watching and waiting. And so right off the bat, you want to trust him, but you already feel a little unnerved by him. And then as he starts to pressure Madoka to become a magical girl a bit, you're like, oh, okay, something's up. And then he starts saying, you never asked, or I didn't think you would want to know, or whenever I tell people, they freak out, so I didn't tell you. But he never lies, and he never changes the rules. And I think that is why he is so much more intimidating and so much more of a bastard. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It helps that we can tell that QB is organic. I can't tell with Fabu. Because in some, it's like, yeah, it's a digital projection, and they'll mention that, like, hey, you can't destroy me just by breaking this little device. But I don't mean it so much in, like, the physical sense as in, like, what is Fabu's brain? I don't know if it's an AI or someone talking through Fabu. And even in the end, I still couldn't discern it. Because clearly it reports to people, like, it has a job to do, and it's still, like, the overwatcher of this killing game, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But that could be done by an AI or a person. It's not clear how omnipotent Favu is. It's not clear, essentially whether Favu is programmed to do this stuff or not. And that doesn't matter so much now that we've finished the show, but at the beginning it was crucial because we're stuck in this limbo of wondering, why would Favu just tell everyone that they're going to die? Like, when some of the magical girls are saying, no, maybe it's not Nemurin who was found dead in her room, maybe it's someone else, we can't just trust coincidence. Favu just says, oh no, yeah, you're gonna die, I just didn't say it before. And you have to wonder what motivated that. If Favu is an AI, it makes no sense to me that Favu would be programmed to disclose that information, because all it does is it puts people into a panic. It happens right away. They stop using the chat room at all. And so to me, it seems like, an oversight, if it is an AI, that it would be able to do that. But then again, if it's not an AI, if it is a person who's controlling it, I still don't have a good reason of why they'd feel compelled to do that. And furthermore, the way that they talk with the girls multiplicatively, where they can sort of, be in more than one place at a time, that doesn't feel humane either. It just doesn't gel well. It's more unclear. QB is a bit more of a cut and dry case that you can learn with. Favu's not.
And I will say that we do know why Favu did it, because they did want them to murder each other, because Cranberry wanted to see them fight. So he did want that panic. I believe at the end, and actually in one of my favorite scenes, when Snow White comes to see Swim and Ripple's bodies, he asks Snow White to be the new master or the magical girl, and she says, "You're in danger," because her danger sense is telling her that if she says no to both of those, Favu will get in trouble back in the magical realm. And I actually liked that. I thought it was intense, and I thought it was cool, but I think that the moments for that were too far in between. But I agree with you. I think Favu not having a set of rules that he follows, and he just once again, it's plot motivated, like you said.
It's still too ambiguous.
It's whatever.
Yeah, I want to say it's a person. For example, the times where Favu absolutely changes tone and stops being an acute voice and instead goes to something much more sinister, which is dumb to me. But anyways, that sounds like a human thing to do. An AI wouldn't change its voice based on context like that. Like, we're only now figuring that stuff out in technology terms.
Right. I guess you're right. He could be I think he says he's a familiar from the magical realm,
yeah,
actually.
But then
but that could still be programmed, or an AI in this case.
And what's the point of it being a person then if they're already setting up this technology? Why have a person monitor this when, they clearly have magical weird omnipotence over the people anyways? It's unclear of how this is working. If a magical girl dies, then, essentially, their magical influence gets taken away, and therefore you can say, oh, we have, more magic available that's not getting pulled up by someone. Sure, that could be how Favu tracks them. But when they're not transformed, and they're not around their device, then, how is Favu keeping track? It just seems like there's too many holes. It's not to say that Favu does keep track all the time, but I don't know that Favu doesn't, and so all these unfalsifiable pieces of it just make it feel shaky.
Yeah. Also Favu has the same thing that Cranberry has, because when Cranberry became the master, Favu was very excited about it because he wanted to see magical girls kill each other too, because he thought that was fun. But once again, you don't know why too well. he just does. He's just the particular familiar of this case.
Yeah, Favo is a blank check
with
character.
Yep, and I think writing rules for your villains makes them so much more interesting, and the fact that Favu breaks whatever rules he sets in place, it just makes you go eh. And he, yeah. And you said you have some parallels to Danganronpa. Do you want to expand on that? Besides the fact that he looks like a bear.
I mean, hold on. Sorry. Oh, there it is. Okay, there's a tinfoil hat. All right. Okay. So we have a killing game between 16 participants, led by an administrator who is color-coded black and white as a cute little animal character. The animal character speaks in a high-pitched anime voice and pretends to be unbiased, but ultimately is clearly pining for this whole thing. Furthermore, the characters are given incentives in order to kill each other. That's another Danganronpa thing. Everyone has a unique style or talent that's being implemented here. I think I've already run out of steam. I could think of more if I put my heart into it, but I just kind of get sad about it. Let's see. There is the mastermind that people are trying to discover. I guess they don't really try in this show. They just kind of let that hang limp. But there is a mastermind who is one of the human characters, in the form of Cranberry here. And so that's another sort of borrowed element. The recommendation is that, essentially, you kill, you sort of get to stay in advance, but in reality, there isn't an intention for, any easy stopping point here. It's potentially coincidental. But it feels like there's a good amount of Danganronpa DNA in here. Danganronpa was out in time to be influenced by this. They're obviously totally different styles. This is a very, as much as I think it has tonal issues, it's a pretty melancholy show. Danganronpa is all over the freaking place. So the comparisons kind of stop there. So in other words, tinfoil hat off.
Nope, that's good. All right, and my last question will go back to Magical Girl Raising Project, because it hasn't gotten a second season. So let's say it does get a second season. It's been 4 years, so I doubt it. But let's say it does. What would you want in the second season? Ignoring what the light novel has. I know the light novel does continue the story. But ignoring what the light novel, if it didn't exist, what would you want to see in the second season of Magical Girl Raising Project?
To be perfectly honest, a restart. I would rather have a whole new bunch of characters rather than sit around and watch Snow White and Ripple.
Well, good news. That is what the light
novel does. I did see that there was a reboot, sort of, or whatever. I think that the implementation of Snow White and Ripple becoming freedom fighters is insane and stupid. It doesn't match Snow White at all, and maybe that sounds like it's counteracting what I asked for earlier, which is to have more development of the characters. But
she does just up and run away from home to go kill terrorists. And
essentially, she now has free billing to be a magical girl and to help people. But instead, she wants to go, attack terrorists, which are not easy to find. No matter what,
she does have her danger sense.
Yeah, but, imagine this. They're going, say, cross-country, cross-city, to go stop bad people, when in the meantime she has to ignore all the cries for help that are happening in her own city that she's been addressing currently, which is now going to be even more, considering that they don't have a whole 16, set of magical girls to help this out. It feels strange that she would abandon the cries of hope in one place to go somewhere else where she can just be violent instead.
Yeah, I can see that.
It's totally separated from everything they learned in the show. And maybe it's because they didn't learn anything at all. But it's like, the show is about people getting into disputes and how that, essentially burns down the barriers of society and causes things to collapse. And her realization of this is not to go to the magical world to prevent this or to become sort of a social defender. Instead, she wants to go fight criminals, specifically like high-end criminals elsewhere that she otherwise wouldn't have an interaction with. I don't see how she's able to just keep the magical world phenomenon away from herself and instead redirect that into something she has no experience with.
I think I agree. I think I would want her to be part of the sequel, the second season, but I think I would rather her be a character that's mentioned or like maybe has a couple episodes of screen time.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'd want to see more of whatever this magical world is. Are they all dicks like Favu? I know he says something around how some masters really just make it about good deeds and no one dies. Mm-hmm. It's just
that's a whole nother.
It's
bucket.
Really
like ugh.
Yeah. It is weird that they are just allowed to do whatever and there's no really rules for what they do. And I would like to see them explore that a little bit more. Maybe if the ending had Snow White accepting to be the magical girl in the magical realm and her kind of dealing with what they do to people in the real world, because I think that could fit her character.
With one little asterisk, I don't want more technicalities. I feel like they set up technicalities in the show and then don't deliver on them. It feels to me that they can't handle these rules that they're setting up without causing plot holes or just in general kind of performing character assassination in terms of like not the literal character death, but death of the character's personality and motivation.
I'd agree. We see a lot of like one of the rules that they introduce is, if you're hurt and you transform back into a human, you're fine. And we never see that utilized once. And I could have sworn it was a foreshadow event,
Because why else would you mention it?
All right. So, with that being said, would you recommend Magical Girl Raising Project to someone who likes magical girl shows? Even if they like Madoka?
That's a Ripple quote for you. So the answer is no.
Yeah, I think it was a fun watch to watch with you. I think I kind of enjoyed watching it become a train wreck. And I have a guilty pleasure for watching shows become a train wreck. I know a lot of people do say that it gets better in the light novel, and I'll believe them. I think that the show generally would be better off suited not having depictions of certain characters. I think, Swim might be a little less sexualized if they just said it's a girl in a swimsuit and we didn't see it. Or if they're like, hey, she's a ninja girl. And I'd be like, okay. But I think characters not being visualized might have made this show better. Mm-hmm. And I think that might be why people who have read the light novel say it's not sexualized, because it's super sexualized.
Yeah, the closer you get to putting this into, a visualized, represented form, something that has to lean on, iconography and, stuff beyond symbology and text, the less you have to sort of interpret, and the more you have to stipulate on what's being shown to you. And so converting this into an anime is not just a net gain, for sure. I totally agree.
All right. Well, with that, do you have anything else to say about Magical Girl Raising Project or Puella Magi Madoka Magica?
Yes, I was wrong. Ripple's character actually does develop because she stops clicking her tongue. Let's be done with this!
Well, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, or comment, or don't. We're not your dads. Feel free to check out the rest of our podcast. They don't normally go in this format, but I feel like we'll do another Mahou eventually.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Thank you for listening.